So now let's compare Chrome OS to other devices. So one of the big things is Chrome devices are definitely not the cheapest thing out there. You can go out and you can buy a Raspberry Pi, you can grab an Android media player for 30 or 40 bucks. But in the end, is it really that much cheaper when you have to come up with a ton of extras on top of the actual hardware? So Android devices, you can find them everywhere, super cheap. The problem with Android is a lot of times the cheaper device you find, the older version of Android it's going to be running on. There's still devices sold on Amazon, eBay, tons of different sources that are still running extremely ancient versions of Android like 4.2. And there's major security issues with those old versions of Android. Some to the point where a lot of times when you try to connect it to newer networks, a lot of IT admins won't even let something like that connect to their network because it uses old versions of encryption or SSL or TLS, where it's not even going to be something that you can deploy. The other part about Android, when you get a device like that, is you still have to figure out, so you have Android, which is loaded with the Android operating system, which we'll talk about here in a second a little bit more, but it's still missing a couple extra pieces. So yes, Arreya does have an Android app. It is something that you can do and you can install on the devices, but we typically recommend you use an Android device that has obviously a more recent version of Android, so you don't run into a lot of those issues. And the other part about it is you still have to figure out remote management. So you can definitely set up an Android device, but if something ever goes wrong, you're going to have to physically go there and actually touch the device and figure out what's going on. There are extra software solutions to do remote management with Android, but it's one of those things where it's not built in and it's usually not as streamlined. So there is Android hardware out there that works, but for the most part, it's once again something that's really not the best option. And by the time you get a good device and good software, you're right up about the same cost as an entry-level Chrome device. And the last thing about Android that typically causes a lot of problems, especially with the lower end Android devices, Android is an open source operating system. So that means that any manufacturer, any OEM has the ability to build their own version of Android specifically for their device. And what this leads to a lot of times is, missing drivers or missing video codecs or even major kernel problems where the Android device might completely stop working after a certain day and time, or something where videos will not play back because the required codecs were not built into that version of Android. And a lot of times it's something where you can't go in and update it. It may have an old version of Android WebView that you can't update because they don't have a GUI set up on those devices where you can go in and update that kind of stuff. A lot of builds of Android on these devices that are built from open source also don't work with the Google Play Store. So it's a lot harder to install an application. You have to manually sideload the application, and you run into a lot of issues, and the entire time you're opening up security holes. Now, Arreya does work on some of these other platforms too, like Windows, Mac, and some other, Linux. Anything with a browser, you do have the ability to point to Arreya. But there are some other considerations if you're going for a full deployment. Once again, namely, we've talked about remote updates or, remote management, something that stays up to date, something that has a kiosk mode too. And that's one of the things that's overlooked on a lot of different Windows devices is they don't have a true kiosk mode. So you can lock it down where it launches one application as the shell, but if it ever crashes, it's not going to automatically reboot, and it's something that you have to go in and once again add other software to remotely manage it. So you need TeamViewer, or you need to set up remote desktop so you can go in and remotely reboot it versus something like Chrome where it just works out of the box.